Some betrayals come with a knife. Mine came with a handshake. If someone had told me 10 years ago that the man I trusted with my life's work would one day sit across a boardroom table and smile while destroying everything I built, I would have laughed. I would have said, not him, never him. But that is the cruelest thing about betrayal. It never wears a warning sign. It wears a familiar face. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is what I built, what I lost, and what I did to get it back. I started my company from a small rented office with cracked walls and a single desk fan that barely worked in the summer heat. I had nothing but an idea, a notebook full of plans, and a stubborn belief that hard work would eventually pay off. For 2 years, I worked alone. I skipped meals to save money. I slept 4 hours a night. I turned down invitations, relationships, even family gatherings, because I believed my company was my one shot at a different life. Then I met him. I will call him Vikram in this story, though that is not his real name. Vikram was sharp, confident, and charming in a way that made people trust him instantly. He walked into my office one afternoon, looking for a job. I didn't have money to hire anyone, but something about his hunger reminded me of myself. So I made him an offer. Not a job, a partnership. Work with me, I said. Not for me, with me. We build this together, and we share everything. The profits, the risks, the failures, the wins. He shook my hand so hard it almost hurt. I will never forget this, he told me. You didn't just give me a job. You gave me a future. I believed him. God, I believed him completely. For the next several years, we built something extraordinary together. I handled the vision, the strategy, the client relationships. He handled operations, negotiations, and the day-to-day grind that kept the business alive. We complemented each other perfectly. Where I was cautious, he was bold. Where I hesitated, he pushed forward. I trained him in everything I knew. I taught him how to read a contract line by line so no one could cheat him. I taught him how to negotiate without showing fear. I introduced him to every investor I had ever met, every supplier who trusted me, every client who believed in our name. I opened every door I had because I thought we were family. There is an old saying, you don't really know a person until you give them power over you. I gave Vikram more power than I gave anyone in my life, and I never once imagined he would use it against me. By our 7th year, our company had grown from a 2-person operation into a business worth crores, with offices in 3 cities and a client list that included some of the biggest names in the industry. People started calling us the Dream Team. Magazines wrote about our partnership as an example of loyalty in business. I remember reading one of those articles out loud to him, laughing, saying, see? Even the world knows we're unbreakable. He smiled at me that day. A warm, easy smile. I didn't know it then, but that smile was already a mask. Because while I was busy dreaming about the next 10 years of our partnership, Vikram was already planning how to take everything away from me. Quietly, patiently, and without ever raising his voice. The signs were there. I just refused to see them. He started taking more solo meetings with our biggest clients, meetings I wasn't invited to. He began building relationships with our investors that excluded me entirely. He started making small decisions without consulting me. Decisions that, individually, seemed harmless, but together were laying the foundation for something much bigger. When I asked him about it, he always had a smooth answer. You're stretched thin, he'd say. Let me handle this so you can focus on the bigger picture. Or, I didn't want to bother you with the small stuff. Each excuse sounded reasonable. Each one chipped away, piece by piece, at my control over the company I had built with my own hands. A close friend, someone who worked in our finance department, pulled me aside one evening. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder before she spoke. Be careful, she said quietly. Something isn't right. Vikram has been meeting with people outside the company. People who aren't our usual clients. I brushed it off. He's just expanding our network, I told her. That's a good thing. She didn't look convinced. But I didn't listen. I trusted him too much to imagine anything darker. That was my first mistake. Not trusting him. Everyone deserves trust when they've earned it. My mistake was refusing to question that trust even when the evidence was standing right in front of me, whispering warnings I chose not to hear. Because 6 months later, everything I built would come crashing down, and the man responsible would be the one person I never suspected. This is not just a story about betrayal. It is a story about what happens when you finally stop being the victim and start becoming the storm. Stay with me, because what happened next will make your blood boil. and what I did about it might just be the most satisfying justice you've ever heard. Looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact moment things began to shift. It was a Tuesday morning, and I walked into the office to find a closed-door meeting already underway in the conference room, a meeting I hadn't been told about. Through the glass wall, I could see Vikram sitting with two men I didn't recognize, papers spread across the table, all three of them speaking in low, serious tones. When I opened the door, the conversation stopped instantly, like someone had hit a mute button. "What's going on?" I asked, forcing a casual tone. Vikram stood up quickly, a little too quickly, and introduced the men as potential partners for a new project. He assured me he was going to brief me later that day. He never did. I let it go. Not because I wasn't suspicious, but because confronting him felt like an insult to everything we had built together. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that after everything we had been through, he deserved the benefit of the doubt. But the cracks kept appearing. Money started moving in ways I didn't fully understand. Small amounts at first, consulting fees, networking expenses, payments to vendors I had never worked with before. Each transaction had an explanation. Each explanation sounded plausible on its own. It was only when I started adding them up, months later, that the pattern became impossible to ignore. I remember the night I finally decided to check our financial records more carefully. I told myself I was just being thorough, doing my due diligence as a responsible partner. I sat in my office long after everyone had left, going through spreadsheets line by line, comparing numbers that didn't quite add up. That night, I found the first real crack, a payment of a significant amount, transferred to a company I had never heard of. When I searched for information about this company, I found almost nothing. No real website, no verifiable address, just a name and a bank account. My hands were shaking as I printed the document. Not from fear, from disbelief. I confronted Vikram the next morning, trying to keep my voice steady. "What is this payment for?" I asked, sliding the paper across his desk. He barely glanced at it. "Oh, that's for a new vendor. They're helping us cut costs on supply chains. I was going to tell you about it this week." His voice was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that comes from rehearsing an answer in advance. I wanted to believe him. Some desperate part of me still wanted to believe that the man I had trained, mentored, and treated like a brother would never lie to my face. So I nodded, and I let it go again. That is the terrible power of trust when it has been built over years. It doesn't collapse in a single moment. It erodes slowly, like a riverbank wearing away underwater, until one day you look down and realize the ground beneath you is already gone. Over the following weeks, I noticed other changes. Vikram started arriving late to meetings we used to run together, always with an excuse about another call or an urgent client issue. He began speaking to our staff in a way that positioned himself as the real decision-maker, subtly undermining my authority in front of employees who had once looked to both of us equally. I started feeling like a guest in my own company. One evening, a young employee named Ritika, who had always been loyal and sharp, asked to speak with me privately after everyone else had left. She looked nervous, twisting her hands together as she spoke. "Sir, I don't know if I should say this," she began, "but Vikram sir has been telling some of the senior staff that he's planning to restructure the company soon. He said changes are coming and that some people might need to choose sides." My stomach dropped. "Choose sides? What does that mean?" She hesitated. "I think he means between you and him." I sat there in silence for a long moment, the weight of her words pressing down on my chest. It was one thing to suspect financial irregularities. It was another thing entirely to hear that the man I had built a company with was quietly turning our own team against me. I thanked her for her honesty and asked her to keep our conversation private. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay awake replaying every conversation, every meeting, every closed door, searching for the moment I had missed the warning signs. The truth was, I hadn't missed them. I had seen them clearly. I had simply refused to accept what they meant, because accepting them meant admitting that the person I trusted most in my professional life was planning to destroy me. I decided, that night, that I needed proof. Not suspicion, not rumors. Real, undeniable proof. I started quietly gathering documents, financial records, emails, meeting notes, anything that could show a clear pattern of what was happening. I did this carefully, methodically, making sure Vikram never suspected a thing. I became, In my own company, a silent investigator, watching every move of the man I once called my brother. What I found over the following month would confirm my worst fears and reveal a betrayal so calculated, so deliberate, that it would change the course of my entire life. Because Vikram wasn't just cutting me out of decisions. He was building an entire empire on the foundation I had laid, and he was preparing to take it all for himself. The next section of this story is where everything breaks wide open, where whispers turn into hard evidence, and where I finally understood the true scale of what my closest friend was planning to do to me. It took me nearly 6 weeks of quiet, careful digging to fully understand the scope of what Vikram had been building behind my back. I want to be honest with you, this was one of the hardest periods of my life. Every day, I had to sit across from him in meetings, smile, discuss business as usual, all while carrying the growing weight of what I was discovering. I had to become someone I never wanted to be, a person who watched his own partner with suspicion, who recorded conversations in his mind, who trusted no one completely. The first major piece of evidence came from an old friend who worked at one of our banking partners. She reached out to me quietly, telling me that Vikram had opened a separate business account almost a year earlier, an account I was never listed on, never informed about, and never given access to. When I asked her, carefully, what kind of activity was happening on that account, her answer confirmed everything I feared. Large sums of money, moving in patterns that matched some of our biggest client contracts. Money that should have gone into our shared company accounts was instead being redirected, piece by piece, into this hidden account under Vikram's sole control. I felt something break inside me that day. Not sadness, something colder. Clarity. I began piecing together the full picture. Vikram hadn't just been diverting funds. He had been quietly building relationships with our top clients, positioning himself as the primary contact, slowly convincing them that he was the true driving force behind our success. He had been planning, for months, possibly longer, to launch his own competing company, using our client relationships, our business strategies, even some of our proprietary systems that I had personally designed. He wasn't just betraying our partnership. He was preparing to steal the very foundation of everything I had built and use it to destroy me in the marketplace. I remember sitting alone in my car one night, outside our office, staring at a folder of printed documents on the passenger seat. Financial statements, email trails, client communications. Each page was a small piece of a much larger puzzle, and together, they painted a picture of calculated, deliberate betrayal. I thought about all the years I had spent teaching him everything I knew. I thought about the nights we had stayed late together, celebrating small wins, comforting each other through failures. I thought about the wedding I had attended, standing beside him as an honored guest, genuinely happy for his happiness. And I thought about how easily he must have been planning this the entire time, smiling at me while quietly preparing to take everything away. The anger came in waves. First disbelief, then grief, then a burning fury that felt like it might consume me entirely. I wanted to storm into his office and confront him immediately, to demand answers, to make him look me in the eyes and explain how he could do this to someone who had given him everything. But something stopped me. A quieter, more strategic voice inside my head. If I confronted him now, with only pieces of evidence, he would simply deny everything, cover his tracks even more carefully, and I would lose any chance of holding him truly accountable. Men like Vikram were skilled at smooth explanations. He would twist the story, make me look paranoid or unreasonable, and use his charm to turn our staff and clients against me instead. I needed more than suspicion. I needed undeniable proof, organized clearly enough that no lie could talk its way around it. So I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting him emotionally, I decided to become patient, strategic, calculated, in the same way he had been calculated with me. I reached out quietly to a trusted lawyer, someone outside our usual business circle, someone Vikram had never met and would never suspect. I explained everything I had found, laying out the documents, the financial discrepancies, the hidden accounts. She listened carefully, her expression growing more serious with every detail. When I finished, she looked at me and said something I will never forget. "This isn't just betrayal," she said. "This is fraud. And if what you're telling me is accurate, you have every legal right to take this to court and take back everything he's tried to steal." For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger and grief. I felt purpose. I realized, in that moment, that this story didn't have to end with me as the victim of someone else's greed. I could rewrite the ending. I could take back control. But I also knew that doing this the right way, the smart way, would require patience I had never been tested on before. I would need to continue working alongside Vikram, pretending everything was normal, while quietly building an airtight case against him. I would need to protect our employees, many of whom had no idea what their trusted leader was truly planning. And I would need to prepare myself emotionally for a fight that was going to test every part of who I was. I looked at myself in the car mirror that night, and I made a promise. Not a promise of revenge fueled by anger, but a promise of justice fueled by truth. Vikram had spent years building a mask of loyalty over a foundation of betrayal. I was about to spend the next few months carefully removing that mask, piece by piece, until the whole world could see exactly who he really was. What happened next would test my patience, my courage, and my resolve, but it would also become the beginning of one of the most satisfying comebacks of my entire life. The next few months were, without exaggeration, the most difficult performance of my life. Every single day, I had to walk into the office and treat Vikram like nothing had changed. I had to sit through meetings, laugh at his jokes, discuss business strategy, and shake his hand at the end of long days, all while knowing what he was truly planning behind that friendly smile. It took every ounce of self-control I had. There were nights I went home and simply sat in silence, exhausted not from physical work, but from the emotional weight of hiding my pain and anger behind a mask of normalcy. But I understood something important during this period. If I wanted real justice, I couldn't act out of raw emotion. I had to be smarter, more patient, and more disciplined than the man who had betrayed me. My lawyer and I built a careful plan. Step 1 was securing and organizing every piece of evidence I had found, making sure it was properly documented and legally sound. This meant working with a forensic accountant who specialized in uncovering hidden financial activity. Together, we traced the flow of diverted funds, mapped out the timeline of Vikram's hidden business dealings, and built a clear picture of exactly how much money had been redirected away from our company. The numbers, when finally calculated in full, were staggering, far more than I had originally estimated. Vikram hadn't just been skimming small amounts here and there. He had systematically redirected a significant portion of our company's revenue over nearly 2 years, funneling it into preparations for his own competing venture. Step 2 involved quietly reaching out to a few of our long-term clients, not to warn them yet, but to gently gauge their loyalty and understanding of our business relationship. I wanted to know how deeply Vikram had already influenced them, and whether they still valued the original partnership I had built the company on. What I discovered gave me hope. While Vikram had certainly built personal relationships with several clients, many of them still respected the systems, quality, and reliability that our company had been built on from the very beginning, systems that I had personally designed and refined over years of hard work. Step 3, and perhaps the most emotionally difficult part, involved protecting our employees. I couldn't reveal what I knew too early, because doing so risked panic, division, and potential leaks back to Vikram. But I also couldn't ignore my responsibility to the people who had trusted me, with their careers and livelihoods. I began quietly identifying key employees who I knew held strong values, people I could trust once the truth finally came out. I made sure, through careful and legal means, that critical company knowledge and systems remained properly documented and protected, so that no matter what happened, the business itself, the real business, built on real hard work, could survive and continue. During this period, Vikram grew increasingly confident. Looking back, I believe he assumed I either hadn't noticed his activities, or that I was too weak and too trusting to ever challenge him directly. His confidence made him careless in small ways, which only helped strengthen the case being built against him. He started spending less time at the office, citing external meetings that I now understood were largely dedicated to finalizing his new competing venture. He became more distant in his interactions with me, sometimes barely masking a kind of quiet superiority, as if he already believed the game was over and he had won. There was one moment, in particular, that I will never forget. We were sitting in a client dinner, celebrating the renewal of a major contract, a contract built on years of trust that I had personally cultivated. At one point, raising his glass, Vikram turned to me with a smile and said, "You know, none of this would have been possible without you laying the groundwork all those years ago." I smiled back, raised my own glass, and said nothing about what I now knew. But inside, that comment cut deeper than anything he could have imagined. He was, in that very moment, quietly acknowledging everything I had built, while actively planning to steal it out from under me. I remember driving home that night, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The anger was still there, always simmering beneath the surface. But beneath the anger was something stronger: determination. By this point, my lawyer confirmed that we had gathered enough solid evidence to move forward with a formal legal case. Financial records showing the diverted funds. Email communications outlining his plans for a competing business. Documentation showing unauthorized use of company resources and client information for his personal venture. It was time to prepare for the next phase, the phase where quiet investigation would transform into decisive action. But before filing anything formally, I made one final decision. I wanted to give Vikram one last chance to show me who he truly was, without me revealing what I already knew. I wanted to see, with my own eyes, just how far he was willing to go. What happened next confirmed every fear I had, and set the stage for the confrontation that would finally bring his carefully built deception crashing down. I decided to set a simple test. Nothing illegal, nothing manipulative in a harmful way, just a way to observe Vikram's true intentions without revealing my hand. I told him, casually, over what seemed like a normal work conversation, that I was considering stepping back from active daily operations for a few months. I explained it as wanting to focus on a new personal project, something that would take my attention away from the company temporarily. I watched his face carefully as I said this. For just a fraction of a second, before he could control his expression, I saw something flicker across his face. Excitement. Barely hidden excitement. "That sounds like a great idea," he said, a little too quickly. "You've worked so hard for so many years. You deserve a break. Don't worry about anything here. I'll handle everything while you're away." Of course he would. Over the next 2 weeks, while pretending to prepare for my supposed step back, I watched as Vikram's behavior shifted even further. He began scheduling meetings that clearly excluded me from long-term planning discussions. He started making more confident statements to staff about future changes and new directions for the company. He even began quietly reaching out to a few of our most valuable clients, subtly positioning himself as their primary point of contact going forward. Each of these actions, carefully documented by me and my legal team, added another undeniable layer to the case we were building. Then came the moment that changed everything. Through a trusted contact who had once worked closely with both of us, I learned that Vikram had scheduled a private meeting with 2 major investors who had originally partnered with our company because of relationships I had personally built over the years. The meeting's purpose, according to my contact, was to formally pitch his new independent business venture, positioning it as a natural evolution of our company's success, essentially framing himself as the true driving force while minimizing my role entirely. This was the final piece we needed. Clear intent. Clear timeline. Clear evidence of a premeditated plan to not only betray our partnership, but to actively undermine the company I had built from nothing. My lawyer and I made the decision. It was time to act. We couldn't simply confront him quietly anymore. Given the scale of financial misconduct and the clear evidence of a competing business built on stolen resources and relationships, this needed to be addressed properly through formal legal channels, ensuring both accountability and protection for the company, our employees, and our loyal clients. We filed for an emergency legal review, presenting our evidence to the appropriate authorities and simultaneously preparing internal documentation to protect company assets and client relationships from further damage. The day everything came to a head started like any other. I walked into the office, greeted our staff as usual, and settled into my daily routine. But this time, everything was different, because I knew that by the end of the day, the truth would finally be out in the open. Around midday, our legal team formally presented Vikram with the evidence we had gathered: the diverted funds, the unauthorized business dealings, the clear pattern of using company resources and relationships to build a competing venture behind my back. I wasn't in the room when it happened, but I was told, later, that his reaction shifted rapidly from confident denial to stunned silence as document after document was laid out before him. each one confirming exactly what he had spent months trying to hide. When he finally walked out of that meeting, his face pale, his usual confident posture gone, he found me waiting in my office. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. For a long moment, he simply stood there, staring at me, as if trying to understand how I had discovered everything without him ever suspecting a thing. Finally, he spoke. "How long have you known?" I looked at him steadily, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and strength. "Long enough to protect everything you try to take." He tried, briefly, to offer explanations, talking about ambition, about feeling underappreciated, about wanting something that was truly his own. But every excuse rang hollow against the mountain of evidence showing calculated, deliberate deception carried out over nearly 2 years. I didn't feel satisfaction in that moment. I didn't feel the triumphant relief I had imagined during all those long, difficult months of quiet investigation. Instead, I felt a strange, heavy sadness, grief for the friendship I had lost, grief for the trust that had been broken beyond repair. But beneath that sadness, there was also clarity. I finally understood, without any doubt, exactly who Vikram truly was. And now, it was time to make sure that the truth, the real truth, would determine what happened next, not his lies and not his charm. The confrontation in my office was only the beginning. What followed over the next several weeks would determine not just the future of our company, but whether justice could truly be restored after such a deep betrayal. News travels fast in any industry, and ours was no exception. Within days of the formal confrontation, word began spreading quietly among our staff, our clients, and our business partners that something serious had happened between Vikram and me. I knew this moment would come, and I had prepared for it carefully. I called an emergency meeting with our entire team, choosing complete transparency over rumors and speculation. Standing in front of employees who had trusted both Vikram and me for years, some of whom looked confused and worried, I explained, calmly and factually, exactly what had happened. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't seek sympathy. I simply presented the truth, the diverted funds, the unauthorized business dealings, the plan to build a competing venture using our company's resources and relationships without proper authorization or transparency. The room was silent for a long moment after I finished speaking. Then Ritika, the same employee who had first warned me weeks earlier, stood up and spoke on behalf of many others in the room. "We trust you," she said simply. "We've always trusted you, and we're going to help you rebuild whatever needs rebuilding." That moment meant more to me than I can properly put into words. After months of carrying this burden largely alone, feeling the weight of betrayal and silence, hearing my team choose to stand beside me instead of walking away gave me a strength I didn't know I still had. Over the following weeks, our legal team worked diligently to formally address the financial misconduct, ensuring that diverted funds were properly accounted for and that appropriate legal consequences were pursued for the unauthorized activities. Vikram, faced with overwhelming evidence, chose to step down from any official role in the company, and legal proceedings continued through appropriate channels to address the financial harm caused. Meanwhile, I focused on something equally important: rebuilding trust with our clients. I personally reached out to every major client, explaining the situation honestly and transparently. I reassured them that the systems, values, and quality that had originally earned their trust remained fully intact, because those things had always been built on my original vision and hard work, not on any single individual's charm or personality. Most of our clients responded with understanding and continued loyalty. A few, who had been more deeply influenced by Vikram's personal relationships, ultimately chose to follow him into his new venture. And while losing any client is difficult, I found a strange peace in this outcome. It confirmed something important. Those relationships had never been truly loyal to our company's foundation in the first place. As for Vikram's new venture, built on the foundation of stolen strategies and unauthorized use of client relationships, it faced significant challenges almost immediately. Without proper legal standing, without the systems I had originally designed, and without the deeper trust that takes years to build honestly, his business struggled to gain the same traction he had clearly expected. I want to be clear about something important here. My goal was never simply to destroy Vikram out of anger or revenge for its own sake. My goal was to protect what I had honestly built, to hold him properly accountable for real harm he had caused, and to ensure that truth and integrity would ultimately prevail over deception and betrayal. Through the proper legal process, appropriate consequences were pursued for the financial misconduct, and much of what had been improperly diverted was formally recovered for the company. It wasn't a dramatic, instant victory. It was a long, difficult process built on patience, careful documentation, and unwavering commitment to doing things the right way. Slowly, methodically, our company began to recover and rebuild. We strengthened internal financial controls, ensuring that no single individual could ever again quietly divert resources without proper oversight. We reinforced client relationships based on transparency and consistent quality, rather than relying too heavily on any one person's charisma or connections. Within a year, our company had not only recovered from the disruption, but had grown stronger and more resilient than ever before, built on lessons learned through genuine hardship. As for Vikram, I heard, through occasional industry updates, that his new venture eventually folded, unable to sustain itself without the stolen foundation it had originally depended on. I felt no satisfaction in hearing this, only a quiet, sad confirmation that dishonest foundations rarely support lasting success. But this story isn't really about his downfall. It's about what I learned through the entire experience. Lessons about trust, about patience, about the true meaning of strength during betrayal. And in the final section of this story, I want to share those lessons with you directly, because I believe they matter far beyond just my own experience. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, thank you. Not just for listening, but for allowing me to share something deeply personal. A story about betrayal, patience, and ultimately, justice restored the right way. I want to leave you with a few honest reflections, lessons I learned through real pain, real patience, and real growth. First, trust is one of the most valuable things we can offer another person, but it must always be paired with awareness. Trusting someone completely doesn't mean ignoring warning signs when they appear. It doesn't mean silencing your own instincts because confronting the truth feels too painful. I learned, the hard way, that real trust includes the courage to ask difficult questions when something feels wrong. Second, betrayal, as devastating as it feels in the moment, does not have to define the rest of your story. For months, I felt like a victim, someone something terrible was happening to, rather than someone actively shaping what would come next. The turning point for me wasn't the moment I discovered the betrayal. It was the moment I decided to respond with patience, strategy, and integrity, rather than letting anger control my actions. Third, real justice is rarely quick, and it's rarely as dramatic as we imagine in our angriest moments. There were nights I wanted nothing more than to confront Vikram immediately, to demand answers, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain his betrayal had caused me. But acting purely from emotion would have only weakened my position, given him room to manipulate the narrative, and potentially cost me the very thing I was fighting to protect: the company, the team, and the truth itself. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, surrounding yourself with people who value honesty and integrity matters more than you might realize during difficult times. My lawyer's careful guidance, my team's unwavering loyalty once the truth was revealed, even the quiet courage of employees like Ritika, who spoke up when it mattered most. These relationships became the true foundation that carried me through the hardest period of my professional life. I also want to acknowledge something honestly. I don't view what happened as a simple story of good versus evil. Vikram wasn't a cartoonish villain. He was someone I genuinely cared about, someone talented and capable, who ultimately let ambition and a desire for personal recognition lead him toward choices that caused real harm to people who had trusted him completely. I share this not to excuse what he did, but because I believe understanding the human complexity behind betrayal helps us protect ourselves more wisely in the future. Betrayal often doesn't come from strangers or obvious enemies. It frequently comes from people we've welcomed closely into our lives, people whose potential for harm we never fully considered because we were focused on the good we saw in them. If there's one thing I hope you take from this story, it's this: protecting yourself doesn't mean becoming cynical or refusing to trust anyone ever again. It means learning to trust wisely, building in proper safeguards, staying aware of changing behavior, and having the courage to seek truth even when it's uncomfortable. And if you ever find yourself facing a betrayal of your own, I hope you remember this. You don't have to rush your response. You don't have to let anger dictate your actions. Sometimes, the most powerful form of justice comes not from an explosive confrontation, but from quiet, patient, determined truth. Truth that, when finally revealed, speaks louder than any accusation ever could. Today, our company continues to grow, built on stronger foundations than ever before. We've learned to build systems that protect against the kind of betrayal I experienced, while still maintaining the trust and collaboration that make real teamwork possible. It hasn't been an easy journey, but it has been a meaningful one. A journey that taught me the true difference between someone who simply performs loyalty and someone who genuinely lives it. Thank you for listening to this story from beginning to end. If it resonated with you in any way, I encourage you to reflect on your own relationships, professional or personal, and consider whether trust in your own life is built on solid ground, or whether it might be worth paying closer attention to the small signs we sometimes choose to ignore. Because in the end, the truth always finds its way to the surface. It might take time. It might require patience you didn't know you had. But when it finally arrives, it has the power to restore not just what was lost, but something even more valuable: your integrity, your strength, and your belief in yourself. Until next time, take care of yourself, trust wisely, and never be afraid to stand up for the truth, no matter how long it takes to come out.